My father locked me and my sister in the basement for 6 years and called us creatures, then tried to drop us into a mine shaft to finish what he started. When I asked my mom why she watched it all happen, she just stared at her coffee and said, "Beds are for people who matter." I didn't say a word. That was 9 years ago. Last week, she died in a nursing home with no one at her funeral. How did you know your father was not a girl, Dad? My father kept all daughters locked in the basement because he said women didn't deserve to see sunlight, and by the time I escaped, I'd been living in darkness for 6 years. Dad had always treated women like property. He made mom sleep on the kitchen floor because beds are for people who matter. He wouldn't let us daughters eat at the table, saying we should be grateful for scraps on the ground. When I got my first period at 12, he said I was officially worthless and needed to be kept where no one could see my shame. He'd refer to us as the basement creatures and make us cover our faces if we ever had to come upstairs because our female features might corrupt his sons. When my sister Hope turned 13, Dad announced that we were getting too old to contaminate the upper floors. He'd finished renovating the basement with locks on the outside. "Women belong underground," he said. "Like worms, you'll learn to live without light." He pushed us down the stairs and locked the door. Mom watched from the kitchen, saying nothing. She'd been broken years ago. The basement had a toilet, a sink, and 2 mattresses on the concrete floor. No windows, no lights except a single bulb Dad controlled from upstairs. He'd turn it on for 1 hour each day while we ate whatever food he threw down the stairs. The rest of the time, we lived in complete darkness. Hope and I held hands constantly, terrified of losing each other in the black. Living underground destroyed us slowly. Our eyes grew so sensitive that the daily hour of light became agony. Our skin turned gray from lack of sun. We lost track of time, not knowing if it was day or night above us. Dad would sometimes leave us in darkness for days as punishment until we begged through the door. He'd laugh and say moles didn't need light anyway. We were allowed upstairs once a month for 10 minutes to shower. Dad would blindfold us first, saying we didn't deserve to see his house. Hope developed severe vitamin D deficiency, her bones softening until walking became painful. I started having panic attacks in the darkness, hyperventilating until I passed out. Dad said we were being dramatic and cut our light time to 30 minutes. After 3 years underground, Hope got sick, really sick. She had a fever that wouldn't break, coughing up blood in the darkness. I pounded on the door for hours, begging for help. Dad finally came down, took one look at her, and said she was faking. But when she started having seizures, even he got scared. He couldn't let her die in his basement. He blindfolded us and brought Hope upstairs. I heard him tell Mom to call their friend who was a nurse, not a real hospital. When the nurse arrived, I heard her gasp. She demanded to know why a 16-year-old girl looked like she'd been kept in a cave. Dad said we had a rare condition that made us allergic to sunlight. The nurse didn't believe him but treated Hope anyway. She whispered to me that she'd be back. The nurse reported us, and child services came the next day. Dad tried to stop them from going to the basement, claiming it was flooded, but they pushed past him and found our prison. The investigators were horrified. They documented everything. The bucket we used when the toilet backed up, the scratches on the walls where we'd tried to count days, the bloody handprints on the door from when I'd pounded until my hands bled. We were removed immediately and hospitalized. Doctors said we had the vitamin deficiencies of kidnapping victims. Our eyes were so damaged from darkness that we had to wear special glasses. Hope's bones were brittle as an elderly woman's, but we were free. Dad was arrested and Mom was deemed unfit. We went to a foster home with windows everywhere. I thought we were safe. I was relearning how to exist in daylight, how to walk outside without panicking. Hope was getting stronger. Then one night I woke up to find Dad standing over my bed. He'd made bail and broken in. "You think you can live up here with real people?" he whispered. "You're basement creatures. You belong in the dark." He drugged me with something that made my limbs heavy. I tried to scream but could only whisper. He carried me to his van, where Hope was already unconscious in the back. As he drove, he explained his new plan. He'd bought property in another state with an old mine shaft, 60 feet underground, he said. "No one will hear you down there. No one will ever find you." I fought to stay conscious as he described the shaft. No stairs, just a rope, no toilet, just a bucket on a pulley, no light at all, ever. "You wanted to leave the basement," he said, "so I found you something deeper." He'd already thrown our belongings down the shaft, food and water for maybe a month. After that, we'd starve in the darkness unless we learned to be grateful. The van stopped on empty land. I could see the wooden cover over the mine shaft and the headlights. Dad dragged Hope out first. She was starting to wake up, mumbling my name. He opened the shaft cover and I heard nothing but black emptiness below. "Ladies first," he said, looping the rope around Hope. "Don't worry, you'll have each other, for as long as you last." As he started lowering my sister into the endless darkness, she screamed my name, the sound echoing up from the depths. I tried to crawl toward them, but my drugged legs wouldn't work. All I could do was watch as my sister disappeared into the black hole, her screams getting fainter. Dad turned to me with a rope, smiling. "Your turn," he said. "Time to go home." My fingers clawed at the dirt, trying to find something to grip as Dad approached with a rope. The substances made everything feel like I was moving through thick syrup. Hope's terrified voice echoed up from the shaft, calling my name over and over, each cry fainter than the last. Dad wrapped the rope around my waist, his hands methodical and practiced. I thrashed weakly, managing to knock his hand away, but he just laughed and grabbed my wrists. The headlights from his van cast long shadows across the barren ground, making the shaft opening look even darker. I bit down hard on his arm when he leaned close. He cursed and backhanded me, sending stars across my vision. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. While he nursed his arm, I rolled sideways, away from the shaft. My legs still wouldn't cooperate fully, but adrenaline was fighting against whatever he'd drugged me with. He grabbed my ankle and dragged me back toward the hole. I dug my fingernails into the ground, leaving grooves in the dirt. Small rocks scraped against my palms. The rope around my waist tightened as he started wrapping it more securely. From deep in the shaft, Hope had gone quiet. The silence was worse than her screams. I kicked out with my free leg, catching Dad in the knee. He stumbled but didn't let go. Instead, he sat on my legs, pinning them while he finished securing the rope. The shaft opening was only feet away now. I could feel the cold air rising from it, smell the damp earth and decay. Dad tested the rope, making sure it would hold. He'd attached it to the bumper of his van, planning to lower me slowly like he had with Hope. I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it in his face. He sputtered and wiped at his eyes, giving me seconds to work at the rope knot. My fingers were clumsy from the substances, but desperation made them move. The knot loosened slightly before he recovered and slapped my hands away. He dragged me to the very edge of the shaft. My legs dangled over the side, kicking at nothing but air. I could see the rope disappearing into the darkness where Hope had gone. Dad positioned himself behind me, ready to push. I twisted suddenly, using the last of my strength to grab his shirt. If I was going down, I'd take him with me, but he was ready for that. He peeled my fingers off one by one, then shoved me backward. For a moment, I hung at the edge, half in and half out of the shaft. My hands found a thick root protruding from the side. I held on desperately while Dad tried to push me the rest of the way down. The root was old and partially rotted, already starting to tear free from the earth. Dad stomped on my fingers. I screamed but didn't let go. He stomped again, and I felt bones crack. The pain cleared some of the substance fog from my mind. I swung my legs, trying to find any foothold on the shaft walls. My foot connected with something solid, a rock ledge just below the opening. I pressed against it, pushing myself up slightly. Dad leaned down to pry my broken fingers from the root. His face was close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. I spat blood in his eyes and heaved myself up with my good hand. He reeled back, giving me space to get my elbows onto solid ground, but the substances and exhaustion were winning. My arms shook violently, barely holding my weight. Dad recovered and grabbed the rope still tied around my waist. Instead of pushing me, he started pulling me up and away from the shaft. I realized his plan. He wanted to position me better for a cleaner drop. No chance of grabbing roots or finding footholds if he dropped me from the center. I went limp, making myself dead weight. He grunted with effort, dragging me across the ground. The rope burned against my skin through my shirt. When he paused to adjust his grip, I rolled hard to the left, tangling the rope around his legs. He tripped and went down on one knee. I kept rolling, wrapping more rope around him. He tried to step out of it, but only tangled himself further. His frustration was building, making him careless. While he worked to free his legs, I crawled toward his van. My broken fingers screamed with every movement, but I forced myself forward. If I could get to the driver's seat, maybe I could drive away, get help for hope. Dad freed himself and came after me. He caught me at the van's bumper, where the other end of the rope was tied. He pressed my face against the cold metal, using his weight to pin me. Something feels off about how the dad managed to break into a foster home and kidnap both girls without anyone noticing. Foster homes usually have security measures and multiple adults around, so I'm curious how he pulled that off so quietly. The position gave me an idea. I grabbed the rope where it connected to the bumper and pulled hard. The sudden tension made Dad stumble. I pulled again, using the rope like a pulley system. He had to step back to keep his balance. I kept pulling, forcing him to move away from me. The rope between us grew taut. He realized what I was doing and charged forward, but I dropped flat to the ground. He tripped over me and hit the van's bumper hard. While he was dazed, I worked at the knot connecting the rope to the bumper. This one was simpler than the one around my waist. My good hand fumbled with it while my broken fingers throbbed uselessly. Dad shook his head clear and grabbed for me again. I kicked backward, catching him in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping. The knot came free in my hands. Now the rope was only attached to me, not the van. I started crawling away from the shaft, dragging the rope behind me. Dad recovered and stepped on the rope, stopping me short. He began pulling me back toward the hole, hand over hand like he was reeling in a fish. My good hand found a sharp rock. I grabbed it and started sawing at the rope around my waist. The fibers were thick and resistant. Dad pulled harder, dragging me through the dirt. My shirt rode up and rocks scraped my stomach raw. The shaft opening was getting closer. I sawed frantically at the rope, feeling some strands start to give way. Dad gave a mighty pull that slid me several feet at once. My legs were near the edge again. I dropped the rock and grabbed onto a small bush growing near the shaft. Its roots were shallow, and it started pulling free immediately, but it slowed me down enough to grab another handhold, a partially buried tire from some old illegal dumping. Dad walked closer, keeping the rope taut. He was done playing games. His face showed cold determination as he prepared for one final push. I wrapped my arms around the tire, knowing it was my last anchor. He yanked the rope violently. The force pulled me several inches, but the tire held. He yanked again, harder. I felt my grip weakening. My broken fingers couldn't help hold on. The substances still made everything fuzzy and slow. From deep in the shaft, I heard Ho cough. She was still alive down there, waiting for me to save her, or to join her. The sound gave me a surge of desperate energy. When Dad pulled again, I suddenly let go of the tire and rushed toward him instead of resisting. The unexpected slack in the rope made him stumble backward. I barreled into his legs, knocking him down. We rolled in the dirt, fighting for control. He was stronger, but the substances affected my pain response too. I couldn't feel half the hits he landed. My broken fingers bent at wrong angles when I tried to grab him, but I kept fighting. He finally pinned me, sitting on my chest. His hands went to the rope, preparing to drag me the final few feet. The shaft opening was right beside us now. I could see stars in the circle of darkness, so far above where hope must be. I remembered something from our years in the basement. Dad always kept his car keys in his left front pocket. Always. It was one of his habits Hope and I had memorized during our monthly trips upstairs, always looking for information that might help us someday. My good hand shot to his pocket. He tried to block me, but I already had the keys. I squeezed them tight, the metal edges cutting into my palm. Then I threw them as hard as I could into the darkness of the shaft. The keys disappeared without a sound, swallowed by the black. Dad's face went from confusion to rage as he realized what I'd done. Without those keys, he couldn't move the van. We were miles from anywhere, on property he'd bought secretly. His escape plan was gone. He roared and wrapped his hands around my throat. I clawed at his arms with my good hand while my broken fingers flopped uselessly. Black spots danced in my vision, darker than the shaft beside us. The pressure on my throat increased as Dad's face twisted with fury above me. My vision tunneled, but I forced my good hand to keep moving, searching the ground blindly. My fingers found a small stone, and I swung it weakly at his temple. The impact was minimal, but it made him shift his weight slightly. That shift was enough. I bucked my hips hard, using the momentum to roll us sideways. We tumbled dangerously close to the shaft edge. Dad released my throat to catch himself, and I gasped for air, my lungs burning. The substances were still heavy in my system, but the adrenaline and lack of oxygen had sharpened my focus slightly. Dad scrambled to his feet first, kicking me in the ribs as he stood. I curled into myself, protecting my stomach while trying to catch my breath. He paced around me like a predator, his breathing heavy with exertion and rage. The headlights created harsh shadows across his face, making him look even more monstrous than usual. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. The substances made my muscles feel like water. Dad grabbed my hair and started dragging me back toward the shaft. Each pull sent shooting pains through my scalp. I dug my heels into the dirt, creating resistance, but he was too strong. My good hand found another rock, larger this time. I twisted in his grip and brought it down on his foot with all my remaining strength. He howled and released my hair, hopping on one foot. I crawled away as fast as I could, which wasn't very fast at all. The rope still tied around my waist dragged behind me, catching on rocks and roots. Dad recovered quickly and grabbed the rope rope, using it to reel me back. I flipped onto my back and kicked at him with both feet. One kick connected with his shin, but it barely slowed him down. He wrapped the rope around his hand for better grip and pulled harder. I remembered the sharp rock I'd been using to cut the rope earlier. It had to be somewhere nearby. My hands swept the ground frantically as Dad dragged me closer to the shaft. My fingers found it just as my feet reached the edge again. I sawed at the rope with desperate intensity. Dad noticed what I was doing and lunged forward, trying to grab the rock. I rolled away, keeping the rock pressed against the rope, feeling more fibers snap. He grabbed my wrist and squeezed until I thought the bones would break, but I wouldn't let go. We struggled for control of the rock. Dad's superior strength was winning, but then I heard Hope's voice from the shaft again, weak but alive. The sound distracted Dad for just a second. I yanked my hand free and slashed the rock across his forearm, drawing blood. He cursed and pulled back, examining the wound. I used the moment to saw through the last strands of rope. It fell away from my waist, and I was no longer tethered to anything, but I was still too drugged to run, and we both knew it. Dad's expression changed from anger to calculation. He walked to his van and returned with a flashlight, shining it down the shaft. I could hear him muttering about the depth and checking the rope Hope was on. The beam of light disappeared into the darkness without illuminating the bottom. I tried to crawl toward the van while his back was turned, but my movements were still sluggish. Dad heard me and turned around, his face calm now, which was somehow worse than his rage. He walked over and grabbed my ankle, dragging me back toward the shaft with methodical patience. My fingers clawed at the ground, finding purchase on an exposed tree root. Dad pulled harder, and I felt my shoulder strain from holding on. He stepped on my hand, grinding it into the dirt. I bit back a scream and held on tighter. He increased the pressure until I had to let go. This time, he dragged me to the opposite side of the shaft from where I'd been before. The ground here was smoother, with fewer roots or rocks to grab. He positioned me at the edge again, but instead of pushing me immediately, he sat down beside me, catching his breath. He explained his new plan in detail, describing how he'd lower me down slowly, letting me dangle for a while before dropping me the rest of the way. He wanted me to have time to think about my choices, about how I'd brought this on myself by trying to live in the world above. I used his monologue as an opportunity to let more of the substances metabolize. My head was clearing slightly, though my limbs still felt heavy. I flexed my fingers and toes, trying to gauge how much control I had. Not much, but maybe enough. Dad stood and grabbed under my arms, lifting me partially. My legs dangled over the edge of the shaft. The cold air from below made me shiver. He held me there, suspended between solid ground and the abyss, savoring his control. I went completely limp, becoming dead weight in his hands. The sudden shift made him adjust his grip, bringing me slightly forward. I used that momentum to hook my leg around his knee and pull. He stumbled but didn't fall, dropping me onto solid ground to regain his balance. I rolled away from the edge and struggled to my hands and knees. Dad kicked me in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me. I collapsed, gasping, but managed to keep rolling, putting distance between us and the shaft. He followed slowly, knowing I couldn't get far. The substances were wearing off gradually, but not fast enough. My broken fingers throbbed with each heartbeat. I could taste blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my tongue during the struggle. Dad grabbed my hair again and dragged me back. This time, he positioned me parallel to the shaft edge, planning to roll me in sideways. I twisted in his grip, making it harder for him to control my movement. He slapped me hard across the face, making my ears ring. The slap actually helped clear my head more. Pain was cutting through the substance fog. I focused on that clarity, using it to plan. Dad was getting tired too. His movements were slightly slower, his breathing more labored. He was older, out of shape from years of easy dominance in his household. Talk about turning the tables with a rope trick. She went from being tied like a package to using that same rope like she's in some twisted tug-of-war game, making Dad dance backward like he's doing the world's worst line dance. Then she pulls the classic move, dropping flat so he face plants into his own van bumper. He tried to roll me toward the shaft, but I spread my arms and legs wide, making myself as difficult to move as possible. He grunted with effort, trying to force my limbs together. I kept spreading them out again every time he moved to a different limb. Frustrated, he straddled me, using his weight to pin me down. His hands went for my throat again, but this time I was ready. I tucked my chin down and bit his hand hard when it got close enough. He jerked back, shaking his hand in pain. I used his moment of distraction to bring my knee up hard between his legs. He doubled over, rolling off me with a groan. I crawled away as fast as I could, which was faster than before. The substances were definitely wearing off, though I was still far from normal. Dad recovered quicker than I'd hoped. He caught my ankle just as I reached the van's rear tire. I kicked back with my free foot, catching him in the chest. He held on, but the impact knocked him back slightly. I kicked again and again, each strike weaker than the last, but still maintaining distance. He changed tactics, grabbing both my ankles and dragging me backward. I twisted onto my back and sat up, reaching for his face. My broken fingers were useless, but my good hand found his eyes. I pressed my thumb against his eye socket, making him release my legs to protect his face. I scrambled under the van, hoping the confined space would make it harder for him to grab me. Dad dropped to his knees, reaching under the vehicle. His arms were longer than mine, and he managed to grab my shirt. The fabric started to tear as he pulled. I wrapped my arms around the van's drive shaft, holding on as my shirt ripped away. Dad cursed and reached further under, trying to get a better grip. I kicked at his hands, connecting with his fingers. He pulled back, then tried from a different angle. The ground under the van was covered in old oil stains and debris. I found a rusty piece of metal, probably part of an old muffler. I gripped it like a weapon, slashing at Dad's hands whenever they came close. He jerked back after one particularly good hit, his palm bleeding. He stood and walked around the van, trying to predict where I'd exit. I stayed in the center, watching his feet move from one side to the other. He was getting impatient, making his movements more predictable. When he committed to the passenger side, I quickly crawled out the driver's side. I pulled myself up using the van's mirror, my legs still shaky but functional. Dad came around the front of the van, his face a mask of cold fury. Blood dripped from his hand and forearm where I'd cut him. His clothes were dirty and torn from our struggle. He advanced slowly, backing me toward the shaft again. I sidled along the van, keeping it between us. We circled the vehicle like a deadly game of tag. My legs were getting stronger with each passing minute, but I was still too slow to outrun him. Dad suddenly changed direction, catching me off guard. He grabbed my arm as I tried to reverse course. His bloody hand left red smears on my skin. I twisted in his grip, using a move I'd seen in a movie during our brief time in foster care. It didn't work perfectly, but it loosened his hold enough for me to pull free. I stumbled backward and my foot caught on something. I looked down to see the rope that had been around my waist earlier. An idea formed through the clearing fog of substances. I grabbed the rope and ran around the van. Dad